Hi everyone, welcome to the BDO People Advisory Webinar Series for 2020. We're just going to wait another couple of minutes until some more people join the call. So now's the time to quickly grab a cup of tea or a drink of water and we'll be back with you shortly. Okay, hi everybody, welcome again to the BDO webinar, BDO People Advisory Webinar Series for 2020. It's been a year of the webinar, I think. So I think when we started these last year, webinars were nowhere near as prolific as they are now. So thank you very much for our very loyal audience who continue to attend these sessions. Today, I'm really excited that we're going to be talking about strategic versus operational HR and what is the difference. And I'm excited about it because it's actually probably one of the questions I get most often for people who are really starting to think about setting up their HR function, trying to understand where they're positioning it. As organisations grow, what is it that they need? And I think we, the team and I, we always have a bit of a run through before this session. And I know from the energy in the discussion we just had leading into it that it's going to be a really fun session today. So thanks everybody for joining us. Today you're with myself, Jenine Waters. I lead our partner, our people advisory practice here for BDO nationally. We also have Maryanne Carter, who's Associate Director, and Kally Mitchell, who is Manager in our people advisory organisation. And Kally also heads up our virtual HR. So she really sees a lot of how HR grows and shifts and changes as organisations grow and change. So Kally, I'm going to hand over to you to kick us off. Oh, housekeeping. Sorry, I'm not going to hand over to you.
She doesn't want to do housekeeping.
So questions you can submit in the questions tab. We've already had a few come through in advance of the session, so thank you for those. But as you go along, please do raise any questions. The slides will be loaded into the webinar as a handout for you to access. If you have any technical difficulties, just go to the link that you can see up on the screen there, and post-session you'll be sent a follow-up email with the presentation slides and a link to the recording, etc. So you can watch it to your heart's content, watch it over and over again, and pass it on to your friends and colleagues. Now I'm going to hand over to the amazing Kally.
Thank you, Jenine. I could have done the housekeeping, but never mind. Okay, so let's just jump straight in. What is operational HR versus strategic HR? So if we look at it, operational HR basically performs the day-to-day operations within your organisation. So meeting the needs of your employees, while strategic HR generally concerns itself with predicting long-term outcomes and ensuring that your company has enough human talent in its pipeline to reach those goals. Both facets of the human resources are fundamental components that can lead to your business success. So generally when we're talking about from an HR operations perspective, they're performing the operational tasks. They do the things such as recruiting and onboarding. They might manage workers' compensation, health benefits. They look after handling employees' complaints and disciplinary hearings. They may do leave requests, maternity, and general paperwork. They also organise training programs, ensure the health and safety of employees, counselling and coaching, and creations of employee rewards programs. So all of those generalist HR components. Now from the HR strategic perspective, strategic HR management is a really big picture role. It requires that HR professional to look at the potential growth plan of the business, to consider how many people they will be needed to meet their organisational objectives and in what roles. It's pretty much having all about the right people in the right roles. Strategic HR is integral to the future planning of your business as it relates to your employees. Human resources professionals working strategically generally focus on increasing employee productivity and the return of investment for the business with the intent of moving your company forward, which we'll be actually looking at a little bit more in detail later on. So over to you, Jenine and Maryanne. Can you share your insights into these definitions of strategic versus operational HR?
I would love to, Kally. I think, as I said to you at the outset, it's the question we most often get asked. even when people are coming through in their HR career. And I actually still remember the day that I figured it out. And it was back, I'm thinking it's probably close to 15, 17 years ago. I was doing a course with the AGSM on strategic HR, so it was a good start. It had the right title. And I think we were talking earlier about this word strategy and strategic, I think often trips us up.
Yeah.
And we really start to, debate it and get caught up in it. I actually generally try to avoid using the word because I think it makes people very confused, and I tend to think more approach and those sorts of things. But the point in time, I remember sitting in this course and it was very simply explained. It was really about being future focused. And the first part of being strategic from a HR perspective was understanding the future direction of your business. And I think that was a really key moment for me. It was about saying you lift yourself up out of the HR operations and the focus of, what recruitment processes are we doing and how effective are they, and really try to get your head into the mindset of the leaders of the business saying, where are we going? And then from a HR perspective, what is it that we will need from our people to be successful in that future? Now, whether that's a skill set, whether that's a mindset, whether that's a culture that we need to create, whether that's, a completely different business model that we're going to need to support, whatever that looks like, it was really about making sure that as we start to progress and think about how we're shifting and changing and the processes that we're either implementing or improving are all designed to help deliver on that future. So that to me was kind of that element of, well, that's what strategic HR is all about. Maryanne, I don't know if that resonates with you.
It totally resonates with me. And as you're talking, Jenine, what I'm thinking is, it is one thing for HR professionals or a managing director to want strategic HR, but it's another thing to know when to introduce that big picture thinking. And to be clear, not everyone needs to be big picture thinking. Strategy is not the end all or the goal. Some businesses actually thrive on just the operational HR elements, and they do very well, and people feel very supported. But if you are going to move into that strategy space, your ability to do it effectively really does lie with the capability of your management team. There is no point beginning to focus on the future if the management team you work with does not have the skills or the knowledge to understand what you're saying and then help you bring it to life in terms of what it means for them and how they will move the organization forward towards that vision. So it's really important that you begin to think about when you introduce this, but most companies start off with the operational aspects, and not all of them, just some of them.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Jenine and Maryanne. So we've defined strategic versus operations. So we're going to do a little bit more of a deep dive, and actually over this next half an hour or so, we're actually going to ask you as the attendees some questions. So we'd love your input and feedback to help us build some of our story, help you understand a little bit more about this topic of operational versus strategic. So over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to shift from, or understand how we shift, to Maryanne's point, from operations to strategic. We're going to look at where can a good HR manager or business partner be strategic and operational?
Ooh, that looks interesting.
And is the business affected when we have both operational and strategic HR? And how is that bottom line affected? And of course, because COVID is such an important part of our day-to-day discussions, we also need to look at what have we learned in regards to HR since the commencement of the pandemic. That's where we get feisty.
That's it.
So time to shift. So let's start with a question and gain your feedback, insight, and we will tailor our responses. So the question is, when do organisations need to make a change from their HR team working operationally to strategically? And you can vote on the following options. A, 0 to 50 employees. B, 50 to 100 employees. C, 100 plus employees. Or D, 1,000 plus employees. Or even E, it is not related to the number of employees. So we'll just give you a moment to have a think about that question, and we'll come back with your answers.
The poll is there.
The poll is live. Hopefully you can see that on your screen, and you should just be able to click on the answer.
Okay, we'll go through those answers in a moment.
Everybody went and got a cup of tea.
No, we're actually getting there. Okay, we've got 27% of people that have started voting. 36%. Oh, we're getting there really quickly now.
Okay, that's fantastic. I all just woke up. See, in the past, our webinars have allowed you to have a little snooze.
I know.
But now we're making you interact. So thanks, everybody.
Fantastic. Okay, we're over halfway now.
And what are the results looking like, Maryanne? What are you starting to see?
I can't see them yet. Oh, yes, I can. So what we have is 0 to 50% of people. No, 17%.
Maybe he's going to share the
No,
results.
yeah, do that. Numbers. Am I good at operational HR?
Okay, so what we're seeing is the majority of people are saying it's not related to the number of employees, and then we have another few who are saying it's 100 plus. So what's your viewpoint, guys? Where would you see this sitting?
It's actually, I think we added that in that last one, that it's not related to the number of employees quite recently when we had that discussion, because previously what we see with the clients that we work in, they actually come to us with those numbers. They want to know actually how many numbers of HR professionals do we need for our organisation of this size. So if we've got 50 employees, how many HR people should we have?
And at what level?
And at what level? If we've got 100 employees, how many HR people do we need? And again, it sort of tends to move on from that. And at that point, I think that's where we start having the discussions around, well, it's actually not related to the number of employees. It's related to all about your business growth and your business strategy.
And I think that's where it really comes into play, because for different organisations, it will be very different. So if you're in an industry where you're shifting and changing constantly, or your business itself is growing really rapidly, and the types of people that you're looking at having within your organisation are changing and shifting, I think you're exactly right that the point in time in which you need a strategic HR viewpoint to come into play can really be very different. So I've spoken to people who've got 50 people in their organisation, but they're doubling every 6 months in size, and they need someone who can help them think about what the future is going to look like and help them put in place strategies and approaches to help them deal with that really rapid growth. Where there are other organisations who might have 200 employees, but it's a very steady ship. There's not a lot of change happening either within the industry or in the company itself. And so, yes, there might be some strategic viewpoints that they need to have, but it's probably not going to be the majority of the support that they need from a HR perspective.
And some of our clients come to us to say, okay, we've got our employees, the productivity isn't where it needs to be.
Yeah.
So the ability to have someone who can think about what are the different levers you need to help drive that productivity, how do you build performance and engagement, is when you again begin to start to shift into that more strategic HR area. And what that then involves is the ability to really look at, for me to really drive productivity and to engage people, the level of where our line managers are needs to begin to shift, and our investment needs to start to look at them to empower them to start to drive a lot of the metrics that you're moving towards.
Yeah, and I think that's the point in time where we often have organisations approach us to say, you know, we've got some challenges, we're not quite sure how to address them. We may not necessarily need a full-time strategic HR director that's really focusing on this, but right now for a period of time we do, and we need to be thinking differently about the problems that we're challenged with right now, or what it's going to look like in the next 2 to 3 years. So I think that's when there's different points of scaling up and down on that strategic component of HR, and recognising that it's not necessarily something that organisations need consistently. You know, there might be periods of time where it's critically important, and then other periods of time where it becomes a more operationally focused role again. So I think, and from the look of the poll results, I think there's a fairly high level of recognition for people who are in these roles that that is the case. And what I typically find for our attendees, and I don't have the list in front of me right now, is we have a lot of HR professionals on these calls. So I can see that they get that, they see how those needs change. What's interesting is when you have those discussions with a CFO who's often responsible for HR before they've built the HR function, or a CEO, it's not as clear to them in terms of at what point you really start to need to think about your HR function.
You know, it's interesting you say that, Jenine, because the HR lens is actually a very critical lens because it's anchored in people. And a very strong HR professional can show a CEO or CFO what are the areas that really need to be focused on to make a difference to the bottom line.
Yeah.
And in areas like that, you would need a strategic mindset, strategic HR capability to help show those elements.
And I think we'll get to that as well as we start to talk through what is the impact on the bottom line when you have really high functioning HR. So it'll be an interesting discussion there.
Yeah.
Absolutely, great discussion. Thank you, ladies. So if we move on to our next topic, we're talking strategic or operational. So again, audience, we're asking you to vote here, and we're going to ask you the following question. Can a good HR manager or business partner be strategic and operational? Now, this is an interesting question. It's caused us lots of discussion here within our own team. So we look forward to hearing your responses. So either vote yes or no. Can a good HR manager or business partner be strategic and operational?
And Jenine, Maddie has showed you the computer to make sure you can look at the numbers.
Maddie gets this. Okay, so we're certainly starting to see a number of people voting now, and they're probably heading towards the answer that I find most interesting. So we're seeing a lot of yeses here, but we've only got 25% of people having voted. So we'll wait a few more minutes. Now, if we truly were on a radio show, that dead moment of air would have been a little problem. All right, I'm going to say we're still heading towards 100% of people are saying yes.
Wow.
Okay, so Maryanne and I had a really interesting chat around this. Can a really good HR manager or business partner be both strategic and operational? Do you want to start talking?
I will start talking. If you want to comment as we're talking, please do. We've got a comment pane, don't we? So as we're talking, I'd love to hear and see what it is that you're thinking. I think it's not impossible to have strategic and operational. However, to have it at the same time, I'm just going to say that because a lot of people in HR grow up in HR. So you start off with the operational and then you learn to see the links. It's very hard to pivot between both areas. And so when we're building capability models, what we do is we look at, for you to be strategic, what are the key elements you need? And for you to be operational, again, what are the key elements that you need? So when you're looking at roles, it's not always easy to find those things in one person. The pivot between going up, having a view across, like seeing the wood between the trees and then getting in there and working out how to navigate, I think can only really happen in certain elements in HR, like performance management but it's not really a skill that I think it's hard to find a skill that one person can do. The rem and rewards, the strategy and the detail, the OD, the strategy and the detail, the talent acquisition plan and the detail. I find it really difficult to be able to pivot.
So I think in my experience, and you're right, Maryanne, let's face it, all of us have grown up through an operational component of HR, and we've all had that grounding. Now, I look at some people who were amazing at their operational HR, and they have definitely moved through their careers and being able to take on more strategic viewpoints and jobs, but there's still an element where their passion and their drive and their energy goes to the operational. So for them to spend a lot of time in strategy, it's a more difficult mindset for them to get into. and it's therefore something that they probably don't focus on as much. And I've also seen people who have gone through the operational side of HR and probably really struggled with it. And if we had not helped them develop to a point in their career where they could lift up into some of the more strategic roles, we probably would have lost some really great minds in HR, because if I was only assessing them on their ability to perform in that operational end of the scale, they may never have made it to the really strategic HR. The other thing I will say is, you all get energy and passion, but you all get energy from certain parts of your job. If you get energy from being really amazing at the operational, at process improvement, at design, at getting in and solving for the day-to-day problems that are in front of you, then your focus is naturally going to be there. And you may be able to lift yourself into the strategy, but it's unlikely that it's going to be what drives you. And you will often see that, HR directors that I've worked with who I think are amazing, but probably get more of their energy from the operational, 90% of their work ends up becoming the operational, because that's what they're drawn to. So I think, and I will say as well, I don't think this is limited to HR.
It's right.
It is
any function.
They are very different skill sets and mindsets, and I think it is difficult to do both equally effectively.
So do you think then, from a HR professional perspective, someone who may be just starting their career in HR, that because they're thinking that for me to be a great HR professional, to be very successful in my career, I need to elevate to strategic, or I need to actually be just excellent in what I do?
Look, I think you need to go with where your energy and your desire to work is. If you are, there still can be senior roles that are operational.
That's exactly right.
You don't have to be. It's not to say that to be a HR director you have to be a really strong strategic HR director. It'll be different for different organisations, and some will need very good operationally focused HR directors. So on all my experience of career development and management, what I would say is, you take what you're passionate about, where you get your energy from, and you develop in that area, and you will be successful because you will be drawn to roles that rely on that capability.
What I will say for our listeners today is, just think about your HR department. Is it that you have one or two people in there? Are they run off their feet? Do they sometimes say to you, we probably need more resources, or if I had someone that did, this particular piece? Because that also lends its ear to, we probably need different capabilities and skills now. We're growing, there's something different that needs to happen here. And I think what some people tend to do is look for that silver bullet, the one person that can do everything. And it's one of those departments where it's easy not to invest in it, because it can be seen as a cost. Thank you, Jenine.
So what would you say then to those professionals out there, those HR professionals that are in those standalone roles where there isn't additional resources, they are growing, but for whatever reason there isn't money in the budget to bring on new resources, and they've got that mindset, or their leadership team have got that mindset that your person needs to be strategic and operational?
First of all, my heart breaks when you say that, and I think that they're amazing. I think they're wonderful at what they do. So I just want to say to them, I think you are exceptional, because it's very hard to be a jack of all trades and still be seen as adding value. So what I'd say to you is, you're doing a really good job. If you're finding it easy, that's fantastic. You've probably found your sweet spot. But for those of you that are not finding it easy, it's actually, it's normal that you're not finding it easy. You need multiple people.
I've done those standalone roles, and I would say that, when I did a standalone role, which I'm probably 10, 15 years ago, it was draining, because you really, really want to be able to focus on the strategic. And, usually when you're in a standalone role, you're at a point in your development where you're starting to learn that stuff. But if you don't have guidance,
or the headspace,
the
time,
there's two things. There's one, building the capability and being exposed to thinking that helps you understand what does it even mean. And I think it's really hard sometimes to get that exposure in a standalone role when you're getting your direction and your and your development from a person who doesn't have necessarily a HR background and so can't help you to elevate that thinking. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing, Maryanne, is that capacity to look at that stuff. When you're in a standalone role, you're pulled from pillar to post constantly. There is so much on your plate that is very difficult to have time, you know, in the 30 minutes at the end of the day, just before you go home, to go, right, now, where would I go strategically and how would I support the direction of the company? So I think that's really important to recognise. And I think that's often when we have discussions with CEOs and CFOs who are building their HR functions, where we might say at that point, you may not have capacity in your organisation for a long-term strategic role where you've got a full-time person who's really focused on that and, you know, has some other roles to play, but strategy is their core. So it's probably when you start to use people like us who are advisors and come in and say, okay, how would we help develop a strategy that's going to help ensure that our HR processes, systems, et cetera, are aligned to what we're trying to deliver in 2 to 3 years. And then how do we build a plan that your standalone person can operationalise and deliver on. And I think that's key, is recognising sometimes it's about bringing the skill set and capability in for a period of time and having that to draw on without necessarily having them sitting in your business the whole time. And now you can use advisors such as us, other organisations we've worked with. We've helped them design part-time roles that fulfil that need for them because they might need it more ongoing. Or we've had people use other contractors who can come in, help them form that work, and really help lift the person who's in a standalone role to be able to deliver on it. I do think it's really challenging. I remember feeling pretty alone when I was in that standalone position and feeling like I went backwards in my development for a period of time there because I didn't have someone who could just help me ask the right questions and think through what those answers actually meant for the work that I was doing. So,
and because the operational requirements are always there. You never seem to be
and they're huge. They don't go away.
And to be honest, I will say I used to get a huge amount of energy from firefighting. Then you go on an adrenaline rush, and you've got a list of 50 things to do, and you just plow through them, and you are doing good work and adding value to your organisation in doing that. You're just not necessarily dealing with the issues that are going to bite you in 2 or 3 years' time if you haven't been thinking about them now.
Absolutely. Great discussion, and I think we could talk about it for a lot longer. But we'll move on. So we're moving on to our next question around business results. So again, we're asking you to vote on our very last question. Does strategic HR affect the overall organisation results? Voting yes or no. We may have already given the answers away, but it'd be interesting to see your insight. So we'll give you a moment and then we'll move on quite quickly so we can finish off.
I guess one of the true questions that we should have thought about when we looked at that is it, does operational HR have that same impact? Is it HR in general, or does it have to be strategic HR? Now, I don't want to say that and confuse everybody that's answering right now, but I think it's probably partly a bigger question. Because I do think we spend, it's back to your discussion earlier, Maryanne, around HR always being a cost centre. It was probably the biggest shift I ever had in my career, was moving from being a cost centre HR to becoming a consultant and being a revenue centre, where all of a sudden the value of HR is so differently experienced. It's a very profound shift in discussion. And I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges that always had being in HR, this viewpoint of you're a cost, but you're not necessarily able to quantify the value that you create for an organisation. Having said that, I think we've improved in our sophistication and our ability to quantify it. So 100% of people are saying yes. Yes, it absolutely has an impact on the bottom line, and I don't think we're going to be the ones to say no.
No, I totally agree.
But I think that's the point. We're continually challenged with proving the value of what often is not measurable. And in the past, company leadership viewed HR, as you said, Jenine, as a cost centre. So how can we evolve? How can we move on from some of those organisations that still view it as a cost centre and don't see the true value?
Look, I actually think I think in bigger businesses, that shift has occurred
Yes.
quite dramatically. You think about things like the Royal Commissions. Some of the key things that were brought out in the Royal Commission into banking, insurance, aged care,
Yeah.
it is all actually coming, well, not all, I'm sure there are other elements, but the stuff I see, it comes back to culture.
That's exactly
And there
right.
is a huge investment that I can see those organisations are now making, because they have recognised that it is not enough to have policies and processes and manage risk and compliance through those sorts of areas. Fundamental to the success of an organisation and to their ability to deliver on their customer needs is their people. Now, whether that's around their people's capability, which again is obviously a key role that HR plays in helping assess and develop that, whether it's around the culture and that old adage of the behaviour that you walk past is the behaviour that you accept. All of those things we can see have become critical to organisations maintaining their reputation and then therefore being able to maintain their revenue and their bottom line. But it's not just those big banks and big institutions and organisations. We see it all the time in whether it's a manufacturing organisation, whether it's an education environment, whether it's a small business or a large business. Fundamentally, the power that people have in an organisation to create success is so critical. And I think in HR, if we can think about those values, we talk about turnover, but when we quantify the true cost of turnover, and not just the actual cost of recruitment and the cost of training and all of those, but the cost of customer satisfaction, the cost of your ability to deliver productivity, and those sorts of metrics are so powerful and so drive that bottom line result.
It's interesting because organisations that do have high turnover can't get traction on their strategies because they are having to continually train, retrain. And while, let's say, a founder or an MD or CEO has a vision of where they're going, if the people if they cannot retain their people, it's very, very hard for them to actually bring to life their vision. And what they're having to do is just work from day to day to make it happen. And what I will say is HR has played such a critical role during COVID. Hats off to every HR professional out there, because I think a lot of you showed the world what it was to actually pivot, be agile, and put in place things that actually make sense for businesses.
Great segue, Maryanne, because I think it's really important that we talk COVID. It's been such an important part of our day-to-day lives of 2020. Like, it's consumed all of us in so many different ways. So what have we learned from COVID and the pandemic? And I guess, what does that mean for our HR business partners or our HR strategists or even our operational HR? How do we shift and change?
We had a really interesting debate about this, didn't we, in the lead up to this webinar? And I think it was, my view is it is critical right now for HR to be very thoughtful about what the future looks like for organisations. I talk to professionals all the time in real estate, in the CBD, talking about what are our spaces going to look like in the future? What are the needs going to be for organisations to have physical office spaces? We see it internally, even here, the messaging around, well, what does the future look like in terms of flexible work? In many respects, and I say this carefully, 2020 has been an amazing human experiment to understand the impact of what we had all thought was really powerful opportunity to be far more flexible in the way that we work. And I think that there is a very, very strong role HR needs to play in actually deliberately thinking about what that future needs to look like. I often talk to people and they go, well, it'll be interesting to see what it's like in 12 months' time. Yeah, it will be. But if HR doesn't support leaders in organisations now be deliberate about what it will look like in 2021 or 2022, then we will have missed a huge opportunity to design the way people work in the future.
And so for all the HR people on the call or any CEOs or MDs that have tuned in, it's very important that HR doesn't just think about, and I know we don't anyway, but what it is that the MD wants or the CEO wants. Because in some states that we have, we are okay to roam around and do what we need to do. So some of the limitations that we had have been lifted. And what's happening in some places is that MDs are wanting to go back, for instance, or line managers want to go back to having their teams in front of them. But from a HR perspective, we need to recognise that people's mindsets are shifting, and continuing to go back to the before way of working actually can be quite difficult. But in other places, okay. Now this is where the debate kind of came in.
Yeah, because I think we had a really interesting discussion, and we've all shifted to completely working flexibly, and I think all three of us have had a very different experience of that. I know, Kally, you were talking about at some point you got to a point where you just wanted to be back in the office.
Absolutely. For me, it was all about having my team and my team around me, but for others, that was very different. People were happy just working on their kitchen table and using Zoom, using Skype, using Teams, or whatever other virtual avenues there were to connect with people.
And I talk to leaders all the time who'll say such and such is, had a 2-hour commute previously, I'm never going to get them back in the office now. And you can see this pent up frustration about what am I going to do about that?
Yeah.
I'm quite happy working from home. Generally, it works really well for me. My concern and frustration sometimes is when I do come into the office, I come in to connect, and half the time there'll be nobody to connect with. So, and I think what was interesting when we started to really debate it, it's around recognising that the experience has been very different for different people.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about what it's like for your 20-something who's coming into the workforce, or for your 70-something who's, maybe not enjoying the Zoom environment as much. And I think what we need to be careful about is putting our people at the centre of what we're trying to create for the future, and understanding those different perspectives, and then designing a future around that.
See, I love what you're saying, because then it takes us away from the debate itself, because it can get quite emotional in terms of, well, actually, I'm actually more aware now. So there have been some employees that have said, I'm more aware now that I have a health thing that maybe before COVID I kind of ignored or wasn't really aware of. But actually, this whole pandemic has brought it to the surface. So I think twice now. I've had people say that I think twice about where I go, because I'm acutely aware of what it could mean for me. And so we've got to kind of understand the perspectives that Jenine is saying, and then design the world in terms of, okay, who do we want to be? How are we going to move forward? How does that tie in with the environment, and how does it tie in with the people that we have?
Well, and I think the people we might want to have, and it was really interesting, one of our clients works in the NDIS space, and I was talking to him earlier this week, and he was saying, we need to have far more diversity in our employment base. We need to have far more people with differing ability levels, physically, disabled people, etc. And I just, as you're talking there, I think about, well, what does the opportunity mean for that as well? If we're starting to think about the diversity of the type of people that we have here, where there might have been limitations in the past, how can we use essentially the learnings from this last 6 months to think very differently about our talent needs for the future, and to kind of put aside some of the assumptions that we've made in the past?
Yeah.
I think it's also interesting to have a look at too, in regards to what is the business model that we also need to have for the future as well. So also thinking about what is that design of that business need to look like if we think about diversity, if we think about flexibility and the types of roles. So as HR can also provide a really good insight into what does that actual business model need to look like as we moving forward.
Yeah, and then again, that's the whole point of strategic HR, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And having that seat at the table.
Guys, we're just hearing that there's some technical difficulties at the moment. So it looks like for most of you, you're experiencing the poll screen as a frozen screen. So don't stress. Really, all we've been going through is some beautiful pictures with a couple of words on them. So as long as you've been listening along, you can close your eyes now, ignore the poll screen, and just listen to as we wrap up the session. But the handouts will be available. I might just end on a couple of questions that have come through. So
Jenine, can I just say one thing before we just move? For the HR professionals that we have that are in roles that don't give them the time to kind of map out what it looks like, just remember, You don't need to be the one that facilitates the session, but your ability to bring people in that can help you have the right discussions will then enable you to put the right things in place. So if
So you don't need to have all the answers.
you don't need to have all the answers. And I think where HR is seen as a cost center, the feeling is that we need to have all the answers. Just remember, everyone's got different capabilities. You can bring people in that will give you that space, move it all forward, where you are the champion and making sure that you are delivering to what it is you want your outcome to be, without having to do and putting all the time in to set it up and facilitate, but you can be part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Thank you, Maryanne. So we had a few questions come in. Some of them I think we might have answered in terms of qualities of a strategic HR partner versus operational. I hope we've kind of covered off on that. There was one really interesting question around, in the hospitality industry where casual employees come and go at a relatively high turnover, what kind of incentives would you recommend to motivate staff and perhaps encourage them to stay with us longer? And Maryanne and I both had the same answer, so you give it, Maryanne.
I was saying the best thing you could do is ask them. Because in our mindset, it might be that it's continuous employment and we reward them with these certain things. But actually, it might be that they're happy to come back, you know, after a month or 2 months, and it's flexibility. And when they come back, if they were to have point scores or whatever it may be, they will tell you. They are a wealth of knowledge. So if what you were to do was to facilitate a session that allowed you to understand that, and then you could work with us to help piece it together, because in that industry, I can only imagine how much work, operational work it is to do the day-to-day and keep it moving.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. How is this accomplished in smaller businesses with the lean HR team? Curious, as we need to be able to bridge both. I think that's a really interesting question. I think it goes back to what you were talking about, Maryanne, is there are many organisations that do have a very lean HR team, and I think to be able to recognise the different points in time where you need to bring help in is really important. It doesn't have to cost the earth. It needs to be aligned to the direction that you're trying to take as an organisation, and really try to help you align to that from a HR perspective. But you don't need to have a whole team of every capability on the ground all the time. You need to be clear about what do we need all the time, and what do we need to buy in at different points in time to help us along the way.
And I think that's a great discussion for the lean HR teams to have with their CEOs, to say, I am here. I can do whatever it needs to be done. But there are times I am going to bring people in because the capacity is just not there for us.
Or there's a different skill set.
Or there's a different skill set.
Have the full range of capabilities in one
Exactly.
team. What are MDs wanting right now? How appreciative of the strategic thinking partner are most line managers?
Do you know what's interesting? When we were going through COVID at the beginning and the thick of it, the majority of MDs, CEOs, founders actually didn't know how to navigate this area. And the connection to other MDs and to their HR person became really strong. So most MDs, when we work with them, or CEOs, they want someone that they can bounce with, someone they can trust and help really get their thinking, help them validate their thinking or think differently. So if you are able to help them bring to life what it is that they're thinking in very practical ways, there's some of the things that I see MDs and CEOs really value in their HR people. They don't have to be big things. That's the thing. You don't have to boil the ocean. You just need to know what's important to them and what is the 1 or 2 things you will do to bring that to life.
And I think that's what I see more and more, because, let's face it, we have worked with the full gamut. We've worked with MDs who have had amazing strategic HR support, and they recognise the need for it, and they're very committed to having it within their business. And we've worked with MDs who really have never experienced HR, and the majority of the role has been performed within their CFO function or has been very operational and compliance driven. And I think my experience has generally been your ability to cut through and be very pragmatic and clear in exactly the way you're saying, to understand what are the issues that keep them up at night, what are the things that are really important to them, and then help them understand how you can help solve for that is the thing that helps then really understand the value. I think if you lead first with process and we must do this, but, you know, and it's really important that we have these 5 steps and we have a spreadsheet to capture this, you lose them because you haven't captured what is the essence of the issues that keep them up at night and how does HR help solve for those.
That's exactly right, Jenine. And I'd like to just put a different spin on this as well. So the question was around the CEO. I'm going to put a spin around, okay, what is it that employees need and want? And again, you ask them, they will tell you. At its fundamental core, people want to feel valued and they want to know that they're contributing to something bigger.
Yeah.
And so if you have things in place that allow them to see that, it is very powerful. It will go a long way. And another piece of it is from a HR perspective, and now I'm moving into governance here, but for HR people to be an employee advocate, not just doing what management wants, and I'm not saying HR people do that, but the ability for HR to stand up and say, actually, from an employee perspective, this is what makes sense, and this is how we're going to move forward, actually helps challenge some of the leadership thinking as well.
Yeah, well, and I think the ability to tie that in with what's keeping managers, like it's often so linked.
That is so true.
But you're so expected to either take it from the position of what are we trying to achieve as management and how do we just make it happen, or with the concept that, you know, what the employees' wants and needs are might be in opposition to that. It's actually trying to get the alignment between the two.
Yeah.
And I think that's so critical. We could talk about this.
And a skill that only HR. I'm going to say that's a skill that HR has.
Yeah.
Some departments are very linked to the numbers, some to productivity, like on the front line. But HR does actually have a view of the organisation that does link the people with the business results. And so knowing if you give yourself time to be able to look at that, you will be the only one with that view.
Great discussion. So I think that's pretty much wrapped up our whole strategic first operational HR. I believe the slides are now working, so you can see all of our contact details here. So if you do have any questions, we would love to hear from you. Our email addresses, our telephone numbers are there, or you can actually send us an email as well. I think all the details will be provided following the webinar today.
Well, thank you again for joining us. We've got a view, I think, coming up of our future webinars. If for some reason the slides aren't working, then by all means just hop onto our web page and they're always updated there. There's also a list of the historic webinars that we've done that hopefully you find interesting. And the next one coming up on the 26th of November is transforming your business with best practice HR operating models. So I'm looking forward to that one.
Oh, me too.
A continuation of our discussion.
Thank you again for your time today, guys, and we look forward to speaking with you next month.
Have a great day.